I would like to just pick on why risk assessment. What is important in risk assessment, and why do we need to concentrate on risk assessment? I think as compliance professionals, first of all, we are all very overwhelmed with time. We've got so much to do and so little time. I think that's the key in risk assessment. To prioritize what we need to do is the number one. And in that priority, what we need to focus on, so we do not miss the risk. What's important is planning. We can, without planning and start execution, our horse would look like this. And that's where the problem is. We start off with everything we've got, with all our energy, and try to make it perfect, and then we forget as we move along. So starting off with planning, starting off with what the end of the year should look like, and being consistent, I think, is very, very important. So why do we need to plan? We need to divide responsibilities in the organization. We need to ensure everybody understands what they need to do, and hence plan through the year so that we do not drop the ball halfway. So there are 3 lines of defense. I think everybody's very well versed with it. What is the core of the operation is the internal control. Now, who handles internal control and who's responsible for internal control? Everyone in the organization, everyone has their roles and responsibilities as a part of the organization to have internal control. The person going to the market visually sees risk. The person who is entering stuff into the computer, he consolidates and can see risk. What is escalated to somebody can have the visibility of the market plus what's entered, and the approvers come in. So everyone in their own roles and responsibilities is responsible for this core operation of internal control. So how do we build this risk assessment? We identify, we assess, we understand the risk, and then we take action. So I'm going to spend a little time in trying and breaking this down so that we get our risk assessment right and we get our planning right. So who's responsible? Who's responsible for putting these objectives? Who's the ultimate owner of this is the board. The board of the company sets the objectives. What happens to these objectives then is taken by the senior management and cascaded down. So the management of the risk is with senior management. What does risk management do then? Risk management coordinates between all of the departments, takes whatever the senior management has given you and say, here, this is yours and this is yours, follows up till it's done, and then goes back to senior management, who then report to the board. So that's how this breakdown happens. How do we ensure that risk management is doing their job? We have internal control. They make sure that you check policies and procedures against everything that is done. Risk management's checking, board is informed. That's what internal audit does. So let's go bit by bit. So we break it down by our scope and planning. Like we discussed a little earlier, scope and planning is the most important thing to make sure how big this planning needs to be. What is the size of the risk assessment we need to do? We have inherent risk, controlled environment assessment, residual risk, and reporting. Now let's just quickly go one by one into it. So scope and planning, you see how big the organization is, where is this organization set, what is the business this organization deals with, what risk does that business bring. So there's a certain risk tag to every business. Every business should have a certain regulatory reporting. If it's a regulated entity, it has a higher risk. If it is not a regulated entity, it is a lower risk. Now, for example, a guy jumping off a parachute, he could have a heart attack. He could have, I don't know, a string could break. His parachute could get on fire. So our current risk, what we are scoping is this guy is going to jump. He goes with the current parachute. What are the risks? And then we find mitigants for it. So scope is seeing what we have at the moment. Once you put that scope together, you will reach what is called your inherent risk. This is what we have. We have this many people, we have this building, the fire extinguishers work, we've got cybersecurity, etc. We've got this many people, we have a few policies and procedures in place. What risk assessment have you done? So this is your inherent risk. Here you go. How do we break that down? Okay, our risk is too big. We put in more policies, we put in more procedures, we set up our systems in such a way that they give out alerts, we hire expert people, that is how we break down the inherent risk. And then we assess it to see if it is within our risk appetite. If it's not within our risk appetite, we go back and assess it again and break it down again. Once we're happy with that, we then reach a controlled environment of assessment. Our risk is within our risk appetite. Okay, we've done this huge exercise. We've checked what's there, we've mitigated half of it, we are now within our risk appetite. What's important here is to continue to be in that risk appetite for the rest of the year. How do we make sure that's done? What we need to do then is to make sure that our reporting goes through right through the year. Those reports will tell us whether our risk appetite is the same that we had in the beginning. Are there any new regulations that has come in that we need to add to our risk assessment? And again, cascade actions down. We need to ensure that this risk appetite continues for the rest of the year. What's a residual risk? The residual risk is the risk that we're happy with, which is within our risk appetite, which we continue throughout the year. We just discussed this. How do we make sure that this residual risk stays the same through the year? We've got what is called the probability and the impact. The probability and the impact, for example, you go to a supermarket, you see all of the one dirham or 50 fils things kept at the counter. They're not so worried about it getting stolen. But the stuff that is more expensive, that needs to be monitored, is kept a little away so that it's a little safe, it is monitored by cameras, etc. That is your risk, and that is a probability and an impact assessment that is done. How often would you catch a fire? Very rarely. How often will be a cybersecurity? Much more often, isn't it? How often do you think people would not fulfill their responsibilities and, I don't know, take 5 dirhams extra into their pocket at the cash counter? So these are things, probability against impact. We also need to add velocity to this. How often do you think this is going to happen when we plan our risk assessment? So this is key, probability against the impact and then the velocity of the whole thing. How do enterprises do their risk assessment? So we've got this enterprise risk management by Corso, which a number of institutions use at the moment. So why Corso? Let's start with how do you identify risk management? What do you define risk management as? So risk management is the measure of the possibility of an event which will occur adversely against the objectives. So anything that stops you from achieving your objective will be classified as risk. Now, why do we do the enterprise risk management? It's to see from an overall perspective, from a very high level perspective, what do you think are these adverse effects that may occur? And how do we mitigate them? So we write a document at the beginning of the year saying that these things may happen, and if they happen, these are our mitigants. So an enterprise risk management is the document where our risk management starts with. What is enterprise risk management? It is to evaluate the risk, to assess the risk, and to have a risk-based approach. But it is a very high level, a very broad, over all departments of the organization, and it is done once a year. So once our enterprise risk management is done and signed off, the risk management kicks off, and then you break down the smaller bits with the rest of the organization. Reporting. Why is reporting important? Like we said, to be consistent right through the year, we need reports. There are 2 reasons why we need reports. The first is that we need to be consistent. Of course, we need to send it to the regulator, etc. But within the organization, it's to ensure that everybody, whoever has different functions, the end result is within our risk appetite. So let's take one example. I'm just going to touch upon retail banking. You have this customer who comes in, who wants to open a bank account. Now that's very different in a fintech world. That's very different in a banking world. Let's take an example in a fintech world. In a fintech world, you have an individual living in Russia. The fintech will say, why can't I bank him? He's an individual, he's done nothing wrong. He just lives in Russia. You look at the banking sector, they don't want to touch Russia. They're like, I'm not taking any money coming via a bank. But fintechs will manage to have a system or a partnership that will allow this guy to be able to put his money onto a wallet, etc. So risk management is first looking at the type of business that you have and then assessing the risk as to whether it fits your risk appetite. Now let's go very briefly about onboarding a customer. How do you, first, whether you're a fintech, whether you're a bank, whether you're a grocery. So let's look at if you're a small bank. You just have only your retail operations. There is a customer that comes in. He brings some money from somewhere. What are the questions you need to ask? Why does he want to come to my small bank? What exactly does he want to do with this account? Where did he get this money from? If you're a large bank and he's brought a little bit of money and come to you, again, same questions. Does it make sense for this customer to walk in and open an account with me? Is he living in a different geography? Is he just moved here? So these are questions we need to understand when we CDD a customer. Although we have information fed into us, it needs to make sense. You live in Sharjah, you're opening an account in Dubai. Why? Doesn't make sense. These are questions we need to ask, to understand. We need to always understand the purpose of you opening an account with me. You have 3 accounts. Why are you opening the 4th account? These are things where we need to understand at CDD level, where, who, and what. Once we understand that CDD, we need to be consistent in his profile. Does his account transaction match his CDD? And that's where KYC comes in. If you think he has 10 accounts everywhere and is a little higher on your risk appetite, you would then review his account more often, making it enhanced due diligence. I think in our world, everybody's very well versed with KYC, CDD, AML, EDD, everything. But I think the problem, what we're facing right now, is we are becoming very monotonous in filling up the form. Everything's there, pass on the form. I think we need to think a little outside the box on this where, who, how, and what, because people depositing money and moving money around, money laundering is evolving. There are different ways of moving money around. You see somebody sold his Bitcoin and brought you money. Okay, it came from Bitcoin, it's all right, we don't need to know anymore. That's not how it works. We need to understand who bought that Bitcoin. Why is it with you now? Why did you sell it? Why are you now putting it in our bank account? What happened to your earlier bank account? Why don't you have a bank account? Those kind of questions, and we shouldn't shy away from asking those questions. So these are just an overview of what we do at CDD. The name and type of the account. Are you domiciled here? Are you a foreign account? What's your current address? What's your current industry? Do you have a new job? Why did you change your job? Etc. What is your anticipated level of activity within this account? Is it going to be just you using it? Are you going to have a lot of cash deposits, etc.? Once you screen, are you a PEP? Are you linked to any high-risk organization? Did you get laid off somewhere? It's very important not to just take whatever's written in the answer. It is to understand the whole profile end to end, whether it makes sense. So high-risk individuals are normally people who are PEPs, would be in the individual category, would be right on top, would be anyone who has an AML alert, bribery and corruption, theft, absconding, not paid his credit dues, etc., credit rating. All of these things would be classified as high risk. You should also categorize high risk for people who are very close proximity to sanctions. If you look at a Russian individual, if he is working in the government sector in Russia or worked in the government sector in Russia, he also falls under the sanctions of Russia. The OFAC sanctions, which is all government employees fall under the sanctions. So we have to be a little more vigilant to not just what the alerted system shows us, but what the profile exposure is to our organization. Low risk is, everybody knows, a very clear profile. His money comes in from another bank account, or he has a full explanation as to why he's opening an account. It could be a salaried account, it could be just a savings account, etc. Here's a very small example, a very simple example, which a number of times we miss. We have two current accounts. One is of my mother-in-law. She has a current account, she does just groceries, she pays a few bills. Very simple, very clear account. The similar current account held by the neighbor. He has two grocery stores, he sends out overseas, he purchases from Bangladesh, he sends to Pakistan, I don't know. There's so much movement in his account. They're both current accounts and they're both fine. One is a higher risk, but we need to classify them as a higher risk because of the movement as well. We do classify according to CDD, but we also need to ongoing CDD classify these kind of accounts over monitoring. How do we do ongoing assessment? The same account, we try to populate, is there high volumes in this account? Are there high transactions in this account? What is the volume of the money moving around? Is it going to the high-risk jurisdiction? Is it going very often? Is he using the ATM very often? Now, for example, if you have somebody who opens an account saying he wants internet banking and then is depositing money often in the ATM, withdrawing money off the ATM, sending it out, I don't know, with a check or etc., it doesn't make sense that he asked you for an online banking account. So this is how you review an account. You break down your entire client portfolio into the movement of the account and then categorize them as high risk. These are risk assessments you need to do ongoing on a periodic basis. You then look at how many current accounts I have. What is the kind of movement? How many are going to how many transactions go into high-risk jurisdictions? How many are cash businesses? If he doesn't have a cash business, but he has a lot of cash money coming in and out, that doesn't make sense. You need to review, you need to trigger a CDD review. You have a savings account, but he has money moving in and out of that savings account. You need to move him onto a current account then. Why does he have a savings account? So these are kind of reviews we need to do on an ongoing basis. And this is the second reason why our reporting has to be perfect and why we require reporting and why we require reporting often. And when we get our reports, we need to break it down to understand our internal risk as well. Once we categorize all of these risks, we try to de-risk customers. We reduce the high-risk customers so that we have the bandwidth to concentrate on the high-risk customers, to review them more often, and ensure the organization has more low-risk and medium-risk customers. This is an organization which is easier to manage from a risk perspective. So we always use a trickling funnel to measure our risk because our high-risk customers should be de-risked, or we understand their profile to make sure we move them onto a medium risk, and we keep monitoring them. We keep monitoring the high-risk customers, so we either exit them or move them onto a medium risk. At the end, this is our process: the customer identification process, the customer due diligence process, and the ongoing process. So all of this together forms a part of the enterprise risk assessment. So I've just taken one example of the enterprise risk management of onboarding customers, and Mansi will take on a little more.